In the last video, we made a couple of email templates using React Email, but currently they're only accessible on our email dev site here where we can preview our templates. So in this video, I want to build a form using Next.js so that we can pick which template we want, tweak some parameters, and then use Resend to send those emails out in bulk. In the last video, we set up a Next.js project and then integrated React Email into the Next.js project. If you'd like to check out how I did that, you can check out the last video, or you can check out my blog that I have on how I set up my new Next.js projects. Once we did the Next.js project, I initialized Shadcn. Shadcn UI is a set of beautiful modern components that you can directly copy paste into your app since it's open source and free. To install it, click on Get Started and then Installation. They have framework-specific guides, so I'm going to go into Next.js and follow these instructions to set up the project as they do. The only small change I made is instead of using their Inter font, I went ahead and used Montserrat. Once you've completed the initial setup, just press Ctrl K and search for dark mode. Follow the Next.js guide to create our dark and light mode toggle. Now that we made our little theme toggle, we need somewhere to put it. So within the page.tsx in the app folder, I made a simple navbar so that we can use the light and dark toggle. With the new Next.js app router, every page is by default considered a server component, but our form needs to use the state and other things which are only accessible on the client. So let's make a client component called email form. To create a client component, simply use the use client directive at the top of a file, and now that file will be a client component, and we can pull that client component into a server component without any issues. To build the form, let's take a look at Shadcn's docs on the form component. Shadcn uses React Hook Form, which is an abstraction that gives you easy access to loading states, input states, and everything else, making working with forms in React much simpler. And with that, we want to use Zord, which is a schema validation library. Now, what is a schema validation library? It allows us to define the shape of our data and then take any given input and validate whether that data is matching the shape. And if not, it can throw an error so that we know that maybe your email is invalid or your name is too long or something like that. So go ahead and install those two packages into your project. And let's go to step 1, which is to create a schema. So in my case, inside the lib folder, I've created a schemas.ts file where I'm exporting all the schemas that I'm going to be using in this project. Let's take a look at the finished product so we get an idea of what kind of data we're actually expecting. So the first field that we need is the email template. So I'm going to store this as a TypeScript enum so that we know that the type can only be one of the options that we set it to be. Then we want the student batch, the student type, and whether they're a new student or not. So these two will again be stored in enum since they are two string options and nothing else. But the new student will be a Boolean because we want to know whether it's a yes or a no answer. Finally, we want the emails, which is just going to be a text area where I can paste in a whole bunch of emails. And we'll parse them such that we can make out the difference between each email. Going back to the schema, I've also created a types.ts file that we can store our enums in. So here I'm creating a const of email templates, which is an array of the options that we have. And I'm putting in this as const so that TypeScript knows that this array cannot change. So if I did not put this as const, then you'd see that the type of this is just a string array. Whereas here we need to know exactly which strings are inside this array. So I'm using the as const. Again, I'm using the same syntax for the intermediate and local so that we have an array of options. Back to the schema, we have the email template, which is a z.enum created of that email templates. And I'm just saying that I'm just setting a default. We're doing the same thing with the batches. And for the student type and new student, I just manually set an enum with an array of options and set a default. The last thing I have is the isTest, which is just a checkbox or a switch component from Shadcn that we're using so that we can send emails only to the test recipients rather than having to paste in or type in the same people that you'll be testing with every time. Finally, I'm spreading this email setting schema into the email form schema and just adding a slightly complex field for the emails. So it starts off straightforward. The z.string means that the emails are going to be a string. However, since I have the option of pasting multiple emails, I'm using Zod's refine function to do some custom validation and throw a custom error. So the refine function will get past a callback function, and the callback function gets the data that this field is receiving. So let's say that in this text area, I paste in name@email.com and name2@email.com. When this data is received in the callback function, it's just a string. But we want to work with that a little better. So I'm going to convert that string into an array by splitting it on a new line. So every time I have a new line, if I go name3 at email.com, then we have a new element in the array. So we'll have an array of different email strings inside. Finally, I want to check if these contacts can be parsed by our email contact schema, which is just checking if we have a z.array with strings inside, and further if those strings are actually valid emails. So once we have the result, if the result is a success, then I'm going to return true. And if not, then we're going to pass in the message, and the message just says one of these emails is invalid. Once the schema is done, we can actually instantiate the form by using the use form. This is a slightly complex TypeScript type where we're using the z.infer function to get the type of the email form schema and pass it in to make sure that our form is aligned with the schema. Then we pass in a couple of configurations. So we're using resolver, the Zod resolver, and this Zod resolver is coming from @hookform/resolvers. So they have resolvers for a whole bunch of schema validation libraries. So in case you're using Yup or any other library, then they should have a resolver for you. And finally, just a couple of default values so that the React inputs know what to start with. Finally, we can get to the actual UI. So inside this form, I'm just returning a Shadcn card component. Make sure to check out the docs if you want more information. I'm just returning a card header with the title, and inside the card content, I've created the form. There's an explanation on the Shadcn docs of the anatomy of a form. So it basically goes like their form component wrapping a regular form tag, and then their special form fields. So these are self-closing tags that take in the render function, and the render function gives you access to this field, and you're setting the field by using the name. And if you see, we have type safety here because we have connected our Zod schema to React Hook forms. For the most part, it's just a copy-paste job. I've copied from the Shadcn docs, changed the name field, and changed a little bit of the copy to reflect what sort of options we're showing. In here, inside the select content, they have select items that show the options that we have. Here, I'm using our array that we created with the email template options and mapping over to get each template. I'm setting the key to that template so that React is happy, and the value so that I can access this in the backend. And for what is being displayed to the user, I'm just replacing the dash with a space and capitalizing announcing so that we have a capital A and a space and then masterclass. The rest of the select fields are pretty much the same thing. The only thing that I struggled with a little bit was some emails require fields like the details page needs all these parameters, whereas sending an announcement doesn't need any of them. So how am I conditionally showing these? I'm sure there's a better way of doing this, but hey, I'm using the form.watch function and passing in email template to get access to the current email template state that we have. So the current option that's been chosen. Then I've made an array of all the options that if this current option is there in this array, then I want to render out the extra parameter. And finally, we have the Shadcn button with the type of submit. And to set the disabled state as well as to show that the button is loading, I'm using the form.formState.isLoading, which is what useForm gives you by default. So you don't have to do any set loading is true and then after some time set loading is false, none of that. Because useForm handles that all for you. So where does that button submit to? Currently on the form, we have an onSubmit, and we use the React Hook forms form.handle submit and pass in our own function here. So this is the function that we get, and Because we're using React hook forms along with Zod, we can be sure that the data we receive here is going to be of type email form schema. Quick thing that I'm doing in this submit is that if the data.isTest is true, I'm going to receive the test recipients from a config file somewhere and send emails using those test recipients. And if not, then I'm just going to use the send function. Now, what exactly is the send function? So this send function is pretty simple. It's just an abstraction that gives us the contact, splits the string of emails and gives us an array of contacts, and uses the send emails function, which is actually a Next.js Server Action. We'll get into that soon. And it receives a success and a message. If it's successful, then we're setting that success to state and handling the errors. So let's take a look at the send emails server action. First order of business is to fetch the template from our template drop-down input. So I'm bringing in email template, batch, student, and new student from the send emails data that we received. In this function, I have a switch statement that switches across all the options that we have for our emails, and it passes in the correct props to each React template that we've created. Most of these props are coming from our config file in the lib/config, but some are coming from these, the batch, student, and the new student. In the main server action, the absolute first thing that you should do is always validate your data, never trust user input. So in the schemas file, you can see that I have one schema for the form where the emails are a string. Whereas we know that once we've sent it over to the server, those emails are actually an array of emails. So that's the only short change in the emails form server schema versus emails form regular schema. So the first thing that I do here is pass in the props into this email form schema, server schema, and check whether that result is the correct data. If not, we immediately want to return with a success of false and a message of invalid data provided. Now that we know that the data that we have is right, we can move into actually sending emails. So I'm just destructuring a bunch of things from the props and from the config. And then we want to initialize a new instance of Resend. Resend is the creator of React email. So naturally, their SDKs have first-class support to pass in React templates into emails that you're sending. And I'm sure you've seen this website before. It's been going crazy online for this 3D Rubik's Cube that they have on the homepage. But yeah, they have beautiful examples with Next.js and everything. It's as easy as creating resend and then calling the resend.emails.send function, and you're off and going. Their pricing is also quite lenient. They give you up to 3,000 emails a month and 100 emails a day for free. And once you do cross over into the paid tier, you get 50,000 emails and no daily send limit. So that's pretty good. So we're creating a Resend instance by passing it our Resend API key from the environment variables. And then I want to get the template. So from the get template function, I'm returning the subject line as well as the actual template. So we just pass in the parameters that are needed for that function. And finally, we can get to sending the emails. In the Resend API reference, they have two functions to send emails. First is just the resend.emails.send. And although you could pass in an array of contacts to this function, but what I noticed was if you pass in multiple contacts into the emails.send function, it registers as a single email sent inside their dashboard. So if you send 10 emails and one of them bounces, then the entire entry gets flagged as bounced. And you can go into that entry and then click through to see each email and find out each email's status. But I found a better option to send multiple emails is their batch.send. And the batch.send takes an array of objects and sends those emails individually as well as creates individual entries for them inside the dashboard. So back in the code, I'm creating the emails objects array, which is an array of objects with the settings for each email that we want to send. So we're mapping through the emails and putting the email into the two fields so that we have an array of whole bunch of objects with each to field corresponding to the email that we put in the front end form. Then we use the resend.batch.send function, but since this is a call to the Resend API, it's always best practice to wrap it in a try catch block. So in the try block, we are running the send function and checking if we receive an error. If we receive an error, then we're returning a success of false and a message of the error name colon error message. If not, then the success is true, and we're just going to say that we successfully sent X amount of emails. In the catch block, I'm just going to catch the error and JSON stringify the error. This is probably not best practice in a production app, but since this is more like a tool that I'm going to be using, I think this is fine. It's going to be rare that this API call actually fails and we trigger this catch block. So in those rare cases, I would like to know the exact complete extent of the error. So everything we saw so far is actually inside a function called send, because we still have a little more logic to do, which is, as you can see, the send batch emails can only send up to 100 emails. So in the case that we paste in more than 100 emails, we should handle that. So after I create this async send function, I'm checking if contacts.length is less than or equal to 100. If it is, then I'm just going to call the send function without any more effort and return its response. But if the contacts are above 100, then we need to do some more work so that we can split the array into sub-arrays of 100 items each. So that's where this utility function comes in, which is called chunk. I'm going to be honest, I just copied this from some article, but it seems to be working, so that's all that matters. I have no idea what this does. But essentially, it's going to take our string array of emails and divide it into multiple sub-arrays of 100 items each. So once we have that, I'm going to get the responses and await a promise.all so that I can map through all the chunked contacts and then send each chunk of 100 and get a response from that. So now this responses is an array of objects, and inside the object we either have a success of true or false and a message which is a string. So now we need to see if this entire operation was a success. So in this const success, I'm checking if every single response in the responses array has a true value for success. If yes, that means that this entire operation was successful and we've sent all of the emails successfully. So if there is a success, then I'm just going to say true and successfully sent all emails. Whereas if we don't have success, that means that at least one of those emails have not been sent. So then again, we have some filtering things to do. So I'm going to take the const errors as the responses dot filter, and I'm filtering out all the errors. So if the response is not a success, then I want that object to be filtered. And then once we have that, I'm mapping that response and returning a message with the message that we get from the resend error. And finally, I'm sending a chunk and figuring out which chunk of contacts this error is from. And finally, I'm returning success as false and a message that says could not send emails to the following chunks. And I'm mapping over the errors. Now, in this map function, I want to return from which email to which email I wasn't able to send, right? So in the chunk, we have chunks of 100, 100. So I want to show that from this email to this email so that I can search for those emails and try to resend later. So I'm doing that by saying error.chunk.0, which is the first email, to error.chunk.chunk.length -1, which is to the last email, and then passing in the error message. So this, if I don't send to two chunks, then it will say could not send emails to the following chunks, brackets, email 1, email last, error message, and then next bracket, email 101, email 199, error message. That's the server action all done. Now the response goes back to the client, and in the client, we need to make sure that we handle any errors that might come through. Back in the email form client component, from the send emails function, I'm receiving the success boolean and the message string that we pass through, and setting both of those into the state because, of course, we need to show this to the client whenever we get this. Then next, I'm checking if we have a success. If we do, then I'm using Shadcn's Toast, which under the hood uses Sonar Toast, which are both great libraries. And I'm saying that we successfully sent those emails. This is just a quick check to make sure that if it's one email, then it says email, and if it's multiple emails, it says emails. And if we have an error, then I'm going to toast error. Finally, I want to set a timeout and clear these success and message states, because once we display it to the user for a bit, it should go so that they can put in the next input and do the cycle again. Down here in our JSX, under the form card content, I created another card content that checks if the success or error message exists. If it exists, we render out this card content with the success and error. This is using Shadcn's utility function for conditional classes in Tailwind CSS, and we're making the border and the text green or destructive based on whether it's a success or a error. Finally, let's take a look at our finished product. I'm just going to check the test emails so that I don't have to type in the emails here, and click on send. You'll notice that when I click send, this will transition into a disabled state and say that we're sending X amount of emails. And then finally, it'll go up. We'll get a toast for either success or error, and the same error success message will show under the button. Let's go for it. And there we go. Initially, I wanted to take you along the entire journey of creating the React emails and then the system to use Resend to send those emails. But unfortunately, after I set up the project, I got way too carried away and completely finished the project. So in this retroactive walkthrough of the project, I'm sure it became a little too rambly. It's definitely too rambly for my liking. But from the future videos, I'm going to try to record more of the process so that I can show you what and how I'm making decisions, what roadblocks I'm hitting, and how I'm trying to figure those out. If you've made it this far, you're a legend. I don't expect many people will, but consider hitting the like button and subscribing so you can see this process of me making videos improve, hopefully.